office.
From impeachments to inaugurations, if it's a political story, we are on the scene. The race for the White House is heating up.
We're beating Biden.
How dare he say that?
If it's breaking news, we're live with the latest coverage. From the White House, the State Department, and Capitol Hill, we know the issues, but above all, we know the players to bring you the latest in-depth analysis on all the key stories that we're covering. I'm Eric Ham. Join me from Washington here on Firstpost America. Hello and welcome to Firstpost America, your global pit stop for the latest news and headlines from the United States and around the world. I'm Eric Ham coming to you live from the nation's capital in Washington, D.C. We'll get you a roundup of all the day's top stories, but first, let's take a look at the headlines. Russian airstrikes cause a blackout in 7 Ukrainian regions. Kyiv accuses Moscow of deliberately targeting the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant. Australia signs a deal worth $3 billion to jointly produce nuclear-powered submarines with the UK as part of the Trilateral Security Alliance AUKUS with the United States. In India, Delhi Chief Minister Arvind Kejriwal appears in court a day after his arrest in a liquor policy case. The accused leader calls it a political vendetta. More than 70 Rohingya refugees reported missing after a boat capsizes off the coast of Indonesia. If confirmed, this would be the biggest catastrophe involving asylum seekers this year. And unidentified attackers ambush and kill 23 soldiers of the Niger army while wounding another 17. Niger's army says at least 100 gunmen came on motorcycles wearing suicide bombs. We begin with updates on the Israel-Hamas war as efforts to reach a truce continue. The United Nations Security Council is expected to vote on a U.S. resolution calling for an immediate and sustained ceasefire in Gaza for 6 weeks and the release of hostages. Now, it's important to note the use of the word immediate in the draft resolution, as Washington has refrained from using it while calling for a ceasefire. Now, the previous U.S. resolution, which was moved at the UN Security Council in February, called for a temporary ceasefire as soon as practical. Now, since the war began, the U.S. has vetoed 3 draft resolutions, 2 of which demanded an immediate ceasefire. In fact, just last month, Washington vetoed an Arab resolution that called for an immediate ceasefire. Now, Washington had said such an action could jeopardize talks and would interfere with negotiations surrounding the hostages. Earlier, the U.S. also was averse to the word ceasefire and vetoed measures that called for an immediate ceasefire. But the latest U.S. resolution marks a further toughening of Washington's stance towards Israel. In fact, the language backs talks brokered by Egypt and Qatar over a ceasefire. Now, in order for a resolution to pass in the Security Council, it will need at least 9 votes in favor and no veto by the permanent members of the Council. Those members include the United States, France, Britain, Russia, and China. Now, U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken, who's in Israel today, said he believes talks in Qatar could still reach an agreement.
The need for an immediate, sustained ceasefire with the release of hostages. That would create space to surge more humanitarian assistance to relieve the suffering of many people and to build something more enduring. We've been working, as you know, with Egypt, with Qatar, and with Israel to put a strong proposal on the table. Hamas responded to that. The negotiators continue to work. The gaps are narrowing, and we're continuing to push for an agreement in Doha. There's still difficult work to get there, but I continue to believe it's possible.
Now, the CIA and Mossad chiefs will be arriving in Qatar today to join the talks. And the main sticking point has been that Hamas says that it will release hostages only as part of a deal that would end the war, while Israel says it will discuss only a temporary pause. The Netanyahu government has continued to vow to eliminate Hamas. Now, the latest U.S. resolution also increases pressure on Israel to allow more humanitarian aid into Gaza, where severe hunger is worsening and the United Nations warns of an imminent famine. The European Union leaders also called for a humanitarian pause in Gaza as well. And they also called for the unconditional release of all hostages and urged Israel to not proceed with a ground offensive in Rafah.
What's happening today in Gaza is the failure of humanity. It's not a humanitarian crisis. It's the failure of humanity. It's not a earthquake. It's not a flood. It's bombing. The only way of stopping this humanitarian crisis, human crisis, is Israel respecting more civilians and allowing more support to enter into Gaza.
The consensus of tonight is that we need an immediate humanitarian pause leading to a sustained ceasefire, the unconditional release of hostages, and the provision of humanitarian assistance. Gaza is on the verge of famine, a catastrophic humanitarian situation. Full, rapid, safe, and unhindered humanitarian access into Gaza via all routes is essential.
Now, after European leaders huddled in Brussels, the focus today shifts to New York. Will the United Nations Security Council pass a resolution calling for an immediate ceasefire after 5 months of war, or will the U.S. resolution be vetoed? Many questions, very, very few answers. And in the Red Sea, Yemen-based Houthis have struck another commercial ship in the Gulf of Aden. The rebel group claims an American-flagged vessel was critically hit with a number of missiles. The Houthis also claim to have fired long-range missiles towards Israel.
The naval forces of the Yemeni armed forces carried out a targeting operation against the American ship Mado in the Red Sea with a number of appropriate missiles. The missile forces also fired a number of winged missiles at Israeli targets in the occupied Palestine, successfully hitting the targets, thanks to God.
Now, U.S. officials did confirm that a commercial vessel was in fact struck, but did not sustain any major damage. The Iran-backed group had issued another round of threats against American, British, and Israeli ships passing through the Red Sea. Now, this comes as reports emerge of the Houthis striking a deal with Russia and China for safe passage of their commercial ships. Meanwhile, Washington continues to strengthen its forces in the region. The aircraft carrier USS Dwight D. Eisenhower has been in the thick of all the action. The carrier group's captain says that his fleet has been attacked by the Houthis every single day for the last 4 months. The captain goes on to say that the biggest threat is from anti-ship missiles and long-range kamikaze drones. He states the U.S. Navy has not deployed its aircraft carriers at this scale since World War II. The Houthis are the biggest threat we've seen, end quote. The U.S. Navy launches airborne operations almost every minute against the Houthis, and American naval aviators and their crews are beginning to feel the effects, calling it the most flying that they've ever done on a deployment. Meanwhile, maintenance crews have raised red flags as the intensity of operations continues to grow. The aircraft carrier's deck is performing a launch or recovery every minute, and it's taking a toll on the ship as well as the fighter jets. Still, the Houthis continue to arm themselves with low-cost, long-range weapons, and fighters of the rebel group are even storing rocket launchers, anti-ship missiles, and long-range drones in their homes.
We have locally made rifles, pistols, rockets, and various types of sniper rifles, as well as RPGs and shells. All categories of heavy and light weapons are now available. All of this is in preparation for the upcoming phase with the Great Satan, the American and British and their proxies.
Now, despite the large presence of Western militaries, the threat from the Houthis remains alarming. Even with the deployment of America's powerful carrier strike group, the waters of the Red Sea remain extremely dangerous. And now to the violence in the Caribbean. Haiti's police has launched a counteroffensive, killing at least 2 gang leaders in a span of 24 hours. During the operation, a gang leader named Ernst Jume was killed in Port-au-Prince. Now, Jume was the leader of a faction called Delmas 95 and a close aide of the man who started the entire chaos, Jimmy Cherizier. Now, Jume's death is a major setback for Cherizier and his gangs, as Jume joined Cherizier's war only recently after a jailbreak. Jume had been tasked with the takeover of posh neighborhoods in Haiti's capital. Now Cherizier has vowed to avenge the death of his trusted aide. The former cop turned gang leader has threatened to increase the intensity of violence. Meanwhile, the international community has stalled its promised intervention in Haiti. And moreover, the Transition Council that was meant to take over after the Prime Minister Ariel Henry's resignation is facing a roadblock. The 9-member council had been finalized by the neighboring Caribbean nations and the United States, but now there are reports of a political divide in the Caribbean community as they fail to agree on a new leader for Haiti. However, Washington has said that the formation of the Transition Council is nearing completion.
I understand that Haitian stakeholders are very close to finalizing membership and remain in active discussions with CARICOM leaders as it relates to the makeup of the Transitional Presidential Council.
However, Cherizier's gang says that they will not allow the Transition Council to govern Haiti.
We don't recognize the CARICOM meetings. We don't recognize the UN Security Council meetings. We don't recognize the body group meetings. We don't recognize the meetings held at the White House. Haiti's destiny has already been made and is not part of any of these groups.
Now, as the fighting escalates, nations including France and Germany have begun rescuing their citizens from Haiti. India, too, has launched an operation with support from the Dominican Republic. Meanwhile, Washington continues to provide aid and relief for Haitians as calls for action grow in the United States.
It's in our backyard, and many of the residents of Haiti are from New York City, from Miami, and from other parts of the Americas. And it's imperative that we have an immediate response. We cannot ignore it and act like it is not taking place. There are immediate things we can do right now. Stop the flow of guns, stop the deportation, give the expertise on how to stabilize the community, and give the resources that are needed at this time.
Now, with no sight of the Transition Council, Cherizier and his gangs have the upper hand, while the people of Haiti feel let down both by their government and the international community. And moving on from a turbulent nation to a troubled economy, Nigerian President Bola Tinubu has announced a ban on public-funded foreign trips of his ministers and government officials. The decision comes amidst growing criticism over its government's travel expenses. Our next report explains the details.
Nigerian officials will not be able to take public-funded foreign trips anymore. And that's because President Bola Tinubu has announced a travel ban for ministers and government officials. The 3-month ban will begin from the 1st of April. The Nigerian government will only allow tours that are deemed absolutely necessary. And even those trips would require President Tinubu's nod. His approval will be given at least 2 weeks before the travel date. The President's office says these travel restrictions will ensure that the government officials focus on their respective mandates for effective service delivery. Tinubu's chief of staff adds that the decision was prompted by concerns over rising travel expenses. The Nigerian administration has been facing criticism for its foreign visits. The president himself has made more than 15 foreign trips since his inauguration in May 2023. Reports suggest that the president spent over $2.2 million in the first 6 months of his tenure for domestic and foreign trips. The amount was reportedly 36% more than the total travel budget amount for 2023. And what infuriated Nigerians more was the Dubai COP summit last November. The Nigerian government sponsored as many as 400 people to attend the summit, a move that was widely criticized on social media. Tinubu woke up to the backlash and took some measures to bring down expenses. In January, the Nigerian president announced a reduction in the size of the official travel delegations. He ordered a 60% reduction in the size of delegations, including his own travel entourage. However, it remains unclear whether Tinubu himself will cut down his trips. Earlier, the president and his representatives defended his trips as vital in addressing the economic issues of Nigeria, a problem that Tinubu is often accused of ignoring. Nigerians are reeling under a severe cost of living crisis. The country's inflation rate rose to almost 30% in February, which is the highest in nearly 3 decades. The cost of food has also gone up by more than 35%.
There are a lot of friends that I know that used to buy tomatoes and they can no longer buy them. They cannot sell it again. They are just trying to find what they can eat now and not to do the tomatoes business again. Even those that push trucks, now a lot of them cannot push it again because the tomatoes are very expensive.
Like today, it was the last food. That's what I made yesterday, this morning. My son took it to school. I don't even have any in my pot now. I don't even have any to eat. I'm not even worried about that. I'm just thinking of what he eat if he comes back.
These economic hardships have spread public discontent across Nigeria. Though the Nigerian president has announced travel curbs to cut down expenses, the question arises: with severe economic crisis grappling the country, are these measures enough to deal with the situation?
And finally, in Latin America, where the policies of the Maduro government are intensifying Venezuela's long-standing dispute with Guyana, the two neighbors have been in a conflict over the oil-rich region of Essequibo. The Maduro government has approved the creation of a new state in Essequibo, which is currently under the control of the Guyanese administration. Now, is this a fight for Venezuela's sovereignty or Maduro's attempt to bolster support ahead of the presidential election? Our next report seeks to provide answers.
The long-standing dispute between Latin American neighbors Venezuela and Guyana is brewing into a storm. They've been at loggerheads over the oil-rich region of Essequibo. And now, this storm is further being fueled by Venezuela's domestic politics.
Las honorables diputadas y los honorables diputados que estén a favor de aprobar.
Venezuelan lawmakers allied with President Nicolas Maduro have approved the creation of a new state in Essequibo, the disputed territory with Guyana. The Maduro government claims it has the right to govern Essequibo. Tensions peaked between the two sides last year. In December, both Venezuela and Guyana agreed to avoid any use of force after the leaders of the two nations met. However, satellite images from last month show Venezuela expanding military bases near its border with Guyana. The dispute is also pending at the International Court of Justice. The ICJ is to decide on which country the territory belongs to, but Venezuela has already ruled out accepting an ICJ decision. It says it doesn't recognize the International Court of Justice. Last year, Venezuela also held a referendum to claim sovereignty over Essequibo. The Maduro government said 95% of voters approved territorial claim on the territory and called it a big win. Guyana hit back, saying its borders are not up for discussion and that it will defend its sovereignty.
We have taken the first steps of a new historical stage to fight for what is ours, to recover what the liberators left us, the Guyana Essequibo. The Venezuelan people have spoken loud and clear, and this victory belongs to all the people of Venezuela, without discrimination or partisanship.
The measures announced are in blatant disregard of the order given by the International Court of Justice on December 1st, 2023. Guyana views this as an imminent threat to its territorial integrity and will intensify precautionary measures to safeguard its territory.
The disputed territory Essequibo, which is currently governed by Guyana, is notable for two reasons. One, it is massive. The 160,000 square kilometer region is mostly thick jungle. It makes up roughly 2/3 of the entire land area of Guyana. It's even larger than the size of England. Two, and more importantly, the land is rich in natural resources, primarily petroleum. This territorial dispute has roots in the colonial era. In the late 1800s, the US and the UK agreed to split the territory between modern-day Guyana and Venezuela. A majority of the Essequibo region was granted to the Guyanese administration. The conflict remained mostly dormant in the 21st century until 2013. That year, Guyana discovered abundant petroleum reserves in the territorial waters above Essequibo. The discovery of offshore oil and gas continued in the following years. Today, Guyana's petroleum reserves are similar to those of Kuwait. It even outranks Saudi Arabia, Norway and Qatar as the country with the world's second highest oil reserves per capita. And access to even a part of these reserves could bring in respite for Venezuela's struggling economy. The Venezuelan economy has collapsed in the last decade despite having some of the largest oil deposits in the world. It has been battling spiraling inflation. There are domestic troubles too, including organized crime, gang violence and corruption. But President Nicolas Maduro has been amping up threats to annex the neighbor. Maduro has attempted to use the conflict with Guyana to bolster support at home. His saber-rattling has also intensified as polls in the Latin American country draw closer. Venezuela will go to polls in July this year to choose a president for a 6-year term. So, is Nicolas Maduro using the decades-long dispute to divert attention from domestic issues ahead of elections?
That's our show for today. We certainly thank you so much for watching. We hope to see you right back here again on Monday. Have a great weekend, and thanks again for watching. From impeachments to inaugurations, if it's a political story, we are on the scene. The race for the White House is heating up.
We're beating Biden. How dare he say that?
If it's breaking news, we're live with the latest coverage. From the White House, the State Department, and Capitol Hill, we know the issues, but above all, we know the players to bring you the latest in-depth analysis on all the key stories that we're covering. I'm Eric Ham. Join me from Washington here on First Post America.